Okay, Ron, Ari, because this is a Jewish event, we're going to start slightly late and wait for the Zoom to populate. Um, if you haven't seen one of these before, what we do is pretty simple and straightforward. The three of us will have a conversation, or I'll ask you questions for about the first 35 minutes or 40 minutes of the hour. Um, Based both on your roles as college, university presidents, and also on the reflections of your really superlative essays, both of you. It's incredible to have you in our 15th issue of SAPIR, the university, with essays by Ron and your wife, and by you, Ari. Um, and um, and then what we always do is we reserve at least the last 20 minutes for questions from our audience. And there is a Q&A function at the bottom of your screens. As questions occur to those of you in the audience, ask them. A preference for questions that are actual questions rather than statements. I'll try to get to those. I won't shy away from the tough questions if I see them. I know both Ari and Ron are more than capable of handling hard questions, and just put them in there, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. So let me begin with a little anecdote that I just mentioned to you before this Zoom began. I was having a conversation with the president of a major research university who was just appointed to his very distinguished, or what a few years ago would have been considered a very distinguished, career-topping kind of profession. So I said, as the conversation began, I said, "Well, congratulations on your new job." And he said something like, "Oh, fortunately, it's just going to be a few years, and then I can get out of here." And that really stayed with me because I think the last few years, and maybe the last year especially, has been so difficult across the American academy that college presidencies, university presidencies, are jobs people don't want. It's considered mission impossible, or at least a very difficult mission. So, Ari, let me begin with you, if I might. You've been in your job a few years. Are you feeling like we are at a kind of a dark moment for American education, higher education, or is this the darkness before the dawn? What's your perspective?
Thank you so much, Brett. Let me first thank you for hosting for this conversation. It's an honor to be with Ron, who's a dear colleague and friend, and really the great work that SAPIR is doing to bring important issues to the fore has become a central part of the conversation. So I really appreciate you and appreciate this forum. I'm stunned by what you said about that president. I'm not stunned in the sense I'm surprised, because that is a spirit that I hear by other presidents. But I have to tell you that I feel blessed to be in this position. I feel that God has put me here for a reason, and that this is a moment of enormous opportunity. And while there is certainly darkness, that just as the spirit of the holiday about to come upon us, that just accentuates the light. And there's enormous opportunity to stand for what universities should be standing for: the truth, moral clarity, accrual of knowledge. This is a great moment to make clear what should have been clear before.
Ron, you're now president emeritus of two very distinguished institutions: Middlebury College in Vermont, one of the best liberal arts colleges in the United States, and of course Brandeis University, a great American institution. Um, university presidents have been through a lot in the last few years. Uh, where do you see what would you say are the kind of lessons that emerge from the last 3 or 4 years in which trust in higher education across the United States has been falling? Schools are under a great deal of pressure. And then, of course, there's politics that exploded across campuses from left coast to further left coast, or west coast to east. Um, uh, what are the big takeaways if you were advising a young colleague just coming into a position as president or chancellor at a research university or a liberal arts college? What would you say to him or her about what the priorities need to be?
First of all, let me second Ari's thanks to SAPIR and to you for all you're doing in having this conversation, and also doing it more broadly in the Jewish world and beyond the Jewish world. I think it's critical. It's a great question. And I have to say that spanning two university and college presidencies from 2004 until just this year, I've seen quite a bit that should have warned us and did warn us in many ways. The financial crisis in 2008-9 certainly signaled that there were real headwinds facing higher education, red flags, and so forth that we should have attended to. Many of us did not, at least not enough. And then, of course, in the last 3 years, as you note, some of the political fallout of just a more and more divided nation coming forward. We, in many ways, in some ways, actually, are a microcosm of that society. I think the issue is ambition. I think the lack of focus and the desire to do too much as a university has really hurt us, trying to be all things to all individuals instead of creating, I wouldn't say niche, but I would say more focused missions that really stem from what's the best a university can offer to young people and to a country. And I think going back to that and being much clearer about what our mission is, not trying to overreach, would probably be the best path forward.
So I'm glad you're mentioning that, Ron. Ari, you wrote a really, I think, luminous and important essay. Well, both of you have terrific essays in this, SAPIR. You were making a fundamental point about the mission of the university, Ari, and I think it extends beyond the very specific mission of Yeshiva University, because you were kind of taking on this idea of the university as a producer of a certain type or certain types of goods intended to serve a consumer formerly known as a student. And this consumerist model of education, the idea that these kids or their families are paying often extraordinary sums of money, they expect returns from it, and they expect rights that are similar to the rights of consumers in other parts of American consumer culture, that is not, in fact, what universities are supposed to be about. They have a different kind of mission. They ought to have or be based on a different set of values, a different understanding of what the relationship between the educator and the student ought to be. So expand on that a little bit, and how that model disserves students and the purpose of education at large.
Yeah, I think that the consumer society we are in has truly warped what a university is supposed to be. The idea of cultivating curiosity, growing knowledge of community. There's an ethos to this community of like-minded seekers, like-minded only in that they share being seekers. They bring themselves, their true selves, into the conversation. But it comes with being part of a whole community. And I differentiate between the consumer and the covenantal. Using the Jewish tradition just as a base in which to understand the university one. Part of the core of all universities to feel that they're unpacking wisdom and in conversation with thousands of years of texts. We have this in the Jewish tradition. Rabbi Soloveitchik said it so beautifully, our giant in the 20th century, that when he was in class, he would invite the great sages into his classroom. So Rabbi Yochanan of old would come into his classroom and say over his opinion, and then Maimonides would come in and then offer his take, and then the Ravad, who would argue on Maimonides, would critique him, and the students would defend the Rambam, and a whole conversation of the generations would unfold. And that's all about this republic of letters that appeared in the Enlightenment, that there's a community of learners that exists not just in conversation today, but going back in history. And what knowledge, how wisdom develops, is by seeing these canons of texts and being in conversation with them. And while, of course, as the ages grow, the aperture widens of what texts we allow in. But while the canon isn't unyielding, it's always unfolding. And people are always in conversation with it, in conversation with each other, that there's a mutual conversation they're a part of. And what we've lost when you lose that is an ethos of learning. Like, to have students against other students in the way that we've seen shows that the allegiances that they used to share have been disrupted. The sense that they're part of this broader community that binds them, that connects them to their teachers, and not as people who are helping them get further promotions, but people who actually have wisdom descending from the ages to share with them. It's a university used to be a whole other model. When you received acceptance to a great university, it was an invitation to participate in the great exchange of ideas that linked and that bound the university to each other and to its past and to its future. And we're seeing an enormous disruption that's taking place. And what's happened today is just a reflection of a much greater problem within the university. And it's very much about, as Ron said, it's about the mission of a university and then the surrounding ethos that is supposed to come with that mission.
Can I just get Brett? Can I
Please
just
do,
add a
Ron.
point? Ari, beautifully put. I agree with that, but I do think it also extends beyond the university. I think we're getting students coming in to your beautifully described community of scholars and learners that have gone through a K through 12 experience that has changed dramatically also, as has society changed as well. And so the product that we're getting, the students that we're getting into the university has changed dramatically. We can point to social media if you'd like. You could point to the changes in American society if you'd like. But I think we, as university individuals, leaders, need to think about what it is we can also do. I know this is going against my mission creep issue, but we have to think about the K through 12 education that's going on as well. If we expect students to come in and do exactly as you said, embrace the type of community of learners that we've had.
That's Ron. I was reading an article in, I think it was The Atlantic, in the last month or two, which described how at Columbia University, professors can no longer assign entire books to students because they are arriving at Columbia having, in many cases, never actually read a book cover to cover. They've read texts, they're not illiterate, but they can't quite handle the reading, much less the kind of reading I was accustomed to 30 plus years ago in school, when it was perfectly normal to read 9 or 10 big books in the course of a quarter. That's what you did. But Ron, I want to ask you something in terms of what Ari said. What the education that Ari described very much reminds me of the education I had at the University of Chicago. We had of our 4 years in college, 2 years was really taken up by the core curriculum. And then I chose to extend it by being in a program that was kind of a great books program. So the education I got was similar to what, say, students at St. John's get, maybe Hillsdale College, Yeshiva, a handful of schools. And there's a lot to recommend this education, but the question is that universalizable? That is to say, is that a model that I won't choose Middlebury Brandeis, but let's say a small liberal arts college or the classic American university can afford to adopt or at least steer more in that direction? Or has that ship simply sailed and higher education is now confronted with the fact that students expect a kind of an a la carte, all you can eat buffet in terms of their educational offerings, no coherence, no sense of what an education ought to be about? Is the education that Ari is offering either blessed or doomed to be a niche in the overall scene of American higher education?
I wish I could say that that ship was still in port, but I think it's not in port unless there are some pretty sacrosanct issues that need to be addressed. And I think the idea, and I think rightly so, I can defend this, but I can also argue against it. The idea that faculty, quote unquote, control the curriculum without major changes in who the faculty are, I don't see this changing. I see a real challenge to this. It's not going to come from on high because that's just not how things work in higher education, at least right now. And what I mean by changes in how things are done, it's, we have a self-replicating system of faculty hiring faculty in departments with very little input from deans, provosts, or presidents. The deans usually should have authority in who's hired and whether or not there is a diversity of ideas and thoughts coming into the department or the program. But in reality, deans usually think and believe they're going back to the faculty. And so they can't make many enemies by doing something as drastic as pushing a curricular reform. Provosts are looking to presidential jobs, or at least they used to. Provosts used to seek presidencies elsewhere. Now it's less so. But they also have a disincentive to sort of rock the boat. And then you have presidents who are busy fundraising and are doing other things as well. So they don't necessarily get involved. So to answer your question, I would love to think that we have a way to return that boat or that ship to sort of deliver the type of education that both you and Ari are talking about, but it will take a lot of change.
Okay, so let's dig a little bit deeper into exactly that. I think Ari has a bit of an advantage, almost unfair, because Yeshiva University emerges from such a distinctive tradition. Anyone who's coming into Yeshiva almost everyone has had a particular ethical, religious, educational formation. It's self-selecting. Fortunately, it's self-selecting at a very high level, kind of already a training in what it means to be a yeshiva scholar. Much harder, Ron, in the more secular world of education. And I mean, this is a cliche, but what people describe as a pipeline problem, right? Who is self-selecting or being selected to be PhD candidates in secular fields? Who is looking for academic jobs? Who's getting them, and how are they in turn selecting their peers? And what worries me is that what you just described, Ron, is sounds like a death spiral. It sounds like there is no way that American universities have a plausible way to emerge from, at least from the existing model. So if you could send I don't know if torpedo is the right metaphor, let's go for magic wand, okay? What is the magic wand that begins to make it possible to even rethink curricular assumptions and the way things are done?
I think boards of trustees and presidents have a leading role to play here. And I think greater knowledge about what we're talking about in terms of how the curriculum has shifted and how the curriculum in many people's minds have been distorted, or there's now rot in higher education. I think exposing that or sharing that information, gaining that information about what in the curriculum is problematic, where have we gone wrong, has to be with the board and with the leadership, and they have to take a role. I think What happened on October 7th, if we have to go back to October 7th now, if anything silver lining came out of that, I think was a revelation to more than the inner circle about what was happening in higher education and what the impact of what was going on in the curriculum, not at Yeshiva, but at these other secular institutions that you mentioned, that had an impact on student behavior and student willing acceptance of just, playing a certain role in this whole situation. So I believe, I'm not saying that boards of trustees should become activists where they should not be activists, but they should be well aware of where we are and how we got here and what it will take to sort of change course, because that's what it's going to take. It's not going to come from bottom up for the reasons we just discussed.
So let's turn this conversation in a more Jewish direction, if you don't mind. Ari, give us a sense of what you saw after October 7th in terms of interest in Yeshiva University. I mean, your university's clearly prospering. I was just at your Gala Hanukkah event a few nights ago, and it was star-studded and fancy. It was very elegant. It was a great event. You raised a lot of money. I get the sense that there is a real hunger in the Jewish community that wasn't there even when you assumed the presidency of Yeshiva a few years ago. So tell us a little bit about that change.
Yeah, there's no question that people have woken up to the need for universities that actually stand for values and that speak with moral clarity. I do think we could get back to this just on the last conversation about the importance of leadership in universities and the lack of it. And if presidents specifically had a vision of mission and purpose that was in kind with the past classical universities, things would be very different, and we could go back to that. For us, for Yeshiva, we're seeing a whole slew of interest from every sector. We're overwhelmed. We're bursting at the seams with students. These are top-tier students. Some of our honors programs, it's like an 8% acceptance rate. It's so difficult to get in. These are the elite students trying to come to Yeshiva University and our undergraduate schools. But it's not just the undergraduate schools. Our graduate schools, which are diverse student bodies, has an over 100% growth in the past 6 years. We've started 20 new degrees. Students, it's not just Jewish students who want to come to normal universities. It's non-Jewish students. They also want to be in a place that speaks values and that actually is safe and nourishing. And so we're seeing the student body coming in droves. We're seeing faculty who don't want to be in departments where they just found out on October 7th that their colleagues aren't supportive of their safety. And they are turning to us and saying, is there a place for us at Yeshiva? And we're seeing donors. And what you just referenced, Brett, we had a 100th annual Hanukkah dinner. We raised over $100 million just from September. This is 3.5 months. We brought in $100 million because people are turning to universities that actually stand for the values that speak to them. So it's, this is what I think this is a moment of great opportunity for universities to distinguish themselves and to take leadership roles, not just at Yeshiva, but others, and they will find support and interest if they have the courage to do so.
So, Ron, let's look at the other side of it. You have, with your wife Jessica, a really terrific essay in this issue of SAPIR. It's about boycotts, and the essay is titled "The Case for Raising Our Voices." And of course, you've seen one university after another, although these efforts have been defeated, by and large have been defeated. This tremendous push to adopt BDS resolutions, clearly large faculty constituencies in favor of them, capable of paralyzing their universities. And even if schools like Brown and others, BDS resolutions have been defeated, I think a lot of Jewish parents think it's only a matter of time before this wave crests and crashes over the heads of Jewish students on campus. You have a counterintuitive take on this. You and your wife. You write, the more egregiously BDS persists, the more a community of scholars who feel affronted by its assault on core academic values will grow. The opportunity now is to lower the social and professional cost to those who would otherwise encourage colleagues to collaborate with Israeli academics and universities in shared intellectual inquiry. Our optimism stems from awareness of such a community. So, expand a little bit on the case for optimism in the face of what seems like so much political radicalism across campuses.
Sure. First of all, I think it's important to distinguish between the D for divestment and the B for boycott. And I think you're right about the D has been fended off. Brown University and others have already taken that off the table in terms of divesting from Israeli companies or Israel per se. But the B is alive and well. I mean, professional associations, academic associations have not ceased picking up votes or scheduling votes for this year and next on this issue. And there's also the implicit, not the explicit, boycotting of Israeli academics and Israeli institutions that we don't even see. Rejection of reading manuscripts, of looking at articles, of collaborating, and so forth. Now, having distinguished between the two and worrying about the boycotting part remaining with us, Jessica and I highlight what we've seen, because I don't think it's even about anti-Semitism or even anti-Zionism. I think there are a large number of academics who are committed to the mission that Ari described and you described at the outset of this podcast, that are really offended by how that mission is being tarnished by what's going on through the boycott. I mean, if anything else, it's also the double standard of why it's only Israeli academics and Israeli institutions that are being, of course, targeted. So we have seen it. The social cost of not participating or participating is great. Think about it. You want to be promoted in your department, so what are you going to do? You rely upon your senior colleagues for your promotion and your tenure mostly, and so you're going to hold back. We think we need to sort of lift these social costs. We need to bring together individuals. We need to highlight a network of support. We need ways to find to support these individuals who we know believe that higher academics is really the goal here rather than politicization of the university. And so we're optimistic. We have to sort of band together and get that network going. I think organizations like Heterodox Academy and others are doing this in a great way, and I think we need to sort of strengthen those ties.
Let me push you a little bit on this. One of the contributors to this issue of SAPIR is Ron Krebs at the University of Minnesota. He was really, he and a colleague, Carrie Nelson, they were outstanding last summer when, after the American Association of University Presidents, the AAUP, the kind of gold standard of academic associations, basically green-lighted boycotts and gave up on the principle of academic freedom. He put together this extraordinary counter statement signed by, I think, thousands of leading scholars to denounce the AAUP. And I looked at his list, and it was great. It was fabulous. But one thing that concerned me is a lot of scholars putting their name to that were either emeritus or they were far along in their careers. So they were distinguished, but they were aging out of their profession rather than coming into it. And what I hear from some academic leaders is that while the boycotters among the faculty, people who favor boycotts, are a minority, they're a loud and aggressive minority, and most professors are either indifferent or afraid. So it leaves the question of, well, who is going to inspirit them, embolden them, How are they going to find their voice? How are they going to be encouraged not to just stick their head into their research and stick to their lane? So you mentioned earlier, boards of trustees are important. How actually do you do this work? If they are indeed the silent majority, how do you get them to be a little less silent on these subjects?
I don't know how many are actually indifferent. I don't know whether you're overestimating. We certainly believe that there are fewer indifferent faculty members. At least true academics are not going to be indifferent to these boycotts. And so what we're counting on as we sort of begin a project and trying to pursue these networks of support for faculty members is that the number who are indifferent is very, very small, actually. There's many, many more who are fearful of speaking up. And this is a self-censorship in many ways. And so I believe the generational change that's occurred is important that you mentioned. But I also think there's a second distinction, Brett, that we should mention also, and that the faculty is somewhat divided, where you have scientists, economists, mathematicians, mostly on the one hand, and then you have scholars who are in the humanities and the soft social sciences, humanistic social sciences, and the arts, who feel very strongly on the other side. And I think we have to sort of search within those areas where most of the noise is coming from to give support to those scholars to be able to step forward and push back on their colleagues. As you say, it's a loud minority. If that's the case, we have to find a way to push back and counter them.
Ari, have you found, I mean, you lead not exactly a religious institution, but certainly an institution that is suffused with deep religious values. Are you getting questions from secular colleagues about how you do it, how you create a student, an atmosphere on campus that is conducive to a better environment?
Yeah, and it's important to distinguish and not to lump all universities together. This is one of the great experiences for me after October 7th, was with all this darkness, was finding the allies and the partners, and they're there. After October 7th, I started a coalition that Ron was one of the founders on, and deeply appreciate his partnership, which is to stand with Israel against Hamas. And the presidents of universities, they were able to speak with moral clarity. And our statement was, we stand with Israel, with the Palestinians who suffer under Hamas's cruel rule in Gaza, and all people of moral conscience. And I went around and I spoke to presidents throughout the country, and the embrace that I received. One of my partners is a group of universities, historically Black colleges, universities. And my colleague, the president, when I said to her, what's happening? She said, Ari, the Jews win when Moses holds his hands up. But who is holding Moses' hands up? It's Aaron and Hur. Let us be your Aaron and Hur. You can lean on us. And I'm like, it was amazing to me that the colleagues across the country that were able to speak with moral clarity, that can stand for truth and realize that it's part of the university's mission to condemn terrorism. And that, I think, I wouldn't lump all these universities together. There are excellent partners that exist today. And part of my efforts is to build those coalitions and to rally the universities that really can stand for values and understand that that's part of their core mission.
Ron, one of the areas that gets a lot of attention, or at least since October 7th, has gotten a lot of attention in the Jewish community, is the presence of DEI administrators throughout college campuses, and the suspicion, the sense that DEI generally does not think about Jews one way or the other, and when it does so with or through a lens that is invidious and sometimes openly hostile. To what extent is the DEI bureaucracy, for lack of a better term, problematic or a part of the problem, or is it potentially a part of the solution?
That's a complicated question. I think the original goals of DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, all sound right on and meant well as well. But as someone who was involved early on with the first group of experts or specialists in this area, hosting a group when I was back at Middlebury early in my presidency, I've seen a great change in the goals of the program and also in the training or the expertise of individuals. I mean, Title VI was supposed to expand and protect or make double standards not possible on campus, due to religious or due to ancestry backgrounds and so forth. But we're only as good as our Office of Equal Opportunity and Title VI implementation is. And what I've seen over the years, not just in my previous posts at Brandeis and Middlebury, but across the board, was an ignorance of who Jews were, how diverse Jews were, why they were perhaps a minority, why they weren't a white majority oppressors, and so forth. So I think DEI, in its purpose, could have been workable, but I think it's expanded to ways that have left Jews out. The question I always get is it best to include Jews in DEI or to remove or lessen DEI as much as possible? And I think the University of Michigan, which has invested a huge amount in DEI and was one of the leaders early on. They've been doing diversity for a long, long time and doing it fairly well, but they've now reached the conclusion that the way in which DEI has more or less morphed, is not all beneficial to the goals of original DEI. And I'm in that court. I'm not so convinced that DEI, at least as we have it today, is the answer. I think either great reform of DEI, rethinking DEI and what it all means, the D, the E, and the I, is imperative, especially when it comes to Jewish students on campus.
Well, let me put the same question to you, Ari, because I mean you're looking at this, and you often will hear Jewish parents saying, "I have no objection to DEI. It's just we're the Jews here. Just add the Jews, and we're okay with this." Others will make the point that DEI is, although the words themselves sound unobjectionable, maybe with question about equity, that DEI is based on a set of assumptions that we get from critical theory. It comes from a particular place in the academy. Its reigning assumptions have to do with systems rather than individual behavior. And so it tends to judge people as members of categories rather than as human beings with moral agency. What's your basic take on it, I guess, is the question.
The problems, of course, come when there are contradictions, when there are conflicts. And here's what happened after October 7th is a good example. Our students are very publicly pro-Israel. We carry the flag. So in our sports games, we sing Hatikva before every game. Our athletes wore hostage pictures on their warm-up jerseys. And wherever we go, we stand for Israel. Like we were in our fencing team, we had a fencing match in MIT, so they put on the Israeli flag. Like we don't hide who we are. So that could offend people. That could trigger other people. And we've had to assert our rights. And when you have DEI, is our Zionists included in DEI? Are we allowed to assert ourselves? And what happens when another group in that spectrum says, "Well, I'm offended by that"? That's where the clash. That's where the clash comes. So, a real sophisticated conversation about this includes, those navigating those situations. Like we don't compromise on who we are.
Let's now turn to the questions in the Q&A box. And again, as questions occur to our participants, please don't hesitate to put them in. The shorter the question, the likelier it is to be asked. So David Jacobson, this is a good question, wants to know, how would you evaluate your colleagues, university presidents, or how your colleagues handled anti-Jewish and anti-Semitic demonstrations the last year. What did they do wrong? What did they do right? Ron, do you want to take that one?
Well, I think it's a mixed bag, but to be honest, which I hope always to be, unlike Ari, who I think did a great job of marshaling support early on for the Wall Street Journal expression of support for Israel and all that he just mentioned, and I'm glad he did that, by the way. I found conversations with a lot of my colleagues, no names, to be more problematic and more responses of an administrator than perhaps a leader. The uncertainty about speaking up, the desire not to offend in the wake of something that was so transparently clear of what was going on really upset me. I mean, it really shocked me in many ways. And in several meetings with other presidents of, I would say, prestigious research universities, I was sort of shocked at the lack of willingness to admit what we had seen. One of these meetings was a mere 2 weeks after October 7th, and it stunned me that it was such a small number who would engage an issue in a special session of this gathering to talk about this issue. I think over time, people have responded much better. I think over time, people were chastised both by the December congressional hearings and also by perhaps understanding more and more what was at stake. And I hope it wasn't just fundraising at stake. I hope people thought about their moral convictions and so forth. But I think the original, and I think it's important not to forget what the original response was, even though I believe it got better over time.
Can I just say, Brett,
yeah.
there was a total absence of leadership. You know, the some that did do well, as I spoke to presidents across the country, everyone knew that Hamas was a terrorist organization. They did not respond because of values or freedom or academic. It was all fear. They were all afraid. They you know, were afraid of their faculty, afraid of their students, afraid of their board. It was such an absence of leadership. And it really shows the fundamental problem with university leadership today. So much like an administrator, no longer educational visionaries. It's a complete change, what I think, from the past. And that is a serious matter to tackle.
Since SAPIR-like solutions, I like to say that, you know, Ron Krebs in his article, but also in speaking with him recently, you know, talks about responsibility of academics and responsibility of administrators. And I think hiding behind academic freedom and freedom of speech is a real problem. And the education of senior leadership and boards about what the limits and what the realities of academic freedom and freedom of speech is will go a long way to not allowing institutions like ours to hide behind these issues. I think that's an important part going forward.
And the hypocrisy, I mean, the hypocrisy. It was only because it was Jewish students that something like this could happen. Like, there was no way that if there was any other minority group that was threatened or harassed, like the Jewish students were in the past year, that this would have been allowed under the patina of academic freedom. That was not the issue, and it really needs to be called out, chastised, and corrected.
Rick Schwader, who I'm guessing is probably the same distinguished professor of the great University of Chicago, who has a wonderful essay also in this issue of SAPIR on Humboldt's vision of the university, has this question, which is wonderfully succinct and important. Do you think campus political rallies and mass demand-oriented campus demonstrations are compatible with the core mission of our universities? If not, why? If yes, how? Ron?
Yeah, I don't see any problem with this so long as they're grounded in something that is, truthful, that isn't harassing, that doesn't attack specific individuals. Yeah, I think student activism in general and rallies are fine. They're a part of the history of higher education, and they're an important part of learning. What we saw, though, wasn't what Professor Schwader was talking about. I mean, these were, yes, they were campus demonstrations and so forth, but they were certainly stilted and full of untruths and also attacks on specific groups. And so I would say those should not be allowed, but others should.
And let me push you a little bit on this specifically, because these campus demonstrations tended to take a very specific form, which was as encampments, from which people were not only included but excluded, and entire areas of the university were basically seized by protesters, and also an unwillingness by the universities to enforce what are called time, place, and manner restrictions. Should any university president ever accept, for any cause, an encampment on his or her campus?
No, that's a layup, and I would say no. That's an easy no. And there are rules, and I assume when the question was raised that the assumption would be that we'd be following rules. Anytime rules are not obeyed, they need to be prosecuted. You need to sort of call them out. So I'm assuming just time, place, and manner is followed, protocols are followed, and rights and responsibilities are followed. But I do think students expressing themselves in that type of manner, fitting those rules, is absolutely part of higher education and part of their educational experience.
Let's see. Okay, here we go. This is a good question from Rachel or Rahel Gould. At my alma mater, which is a top-tier liberal arts college in the Northeast, there's a serious problem with faculty views on the Middle East being far too one-dimensional. That is extremely progressive to the left and anti-Israel. How do we address this imbalance in faculty populations to have a broader representation of views and ensure that faculty are presenting factual scholarship around the subject of the Middle East? Who wants to take that?
Ari, you can go first.
Sure. I think this is a great expression of responsibility by university leadership. And it goes to the chairs, and it goes to the hiring, and who you're bringing into your tenured faculty. There's no question that we should be seeking balance, which also includes pro-Israel views on campus. I don't think that's a question. I also don't think it's a question that when somebody says something radical and crazy or immoral, that it's up to the leadership to call that out. And I think there's been a confusion between academic freedom and moral integrity that actually is not in contradiction. I think about when Columbia invited Ahmadinejad to speak, and Bollinger had to decide, whether he's going to allow him to speak or not. And he decided that academic freedom, forced him to allow him to speak, but he introduced him and took the liberty to talk about that he's a tyrant and morally critique him. Meaning, even if you have, academics who are saying terrible things and you think that's part of academic freedom and needs to be, that's okay. But that doesn't negate the responsibility of leadership to speak with clarity and moral integrity.
I'd love to answer. So I agree with what Ari said. I think two things should happen at the least. One is, not to use a cliche, but flooding the universities here with Israeli scholars, with Israeli postdocs, with Israeli doctoral students, to sort of change the narrative. Now, not all Israelis are necessarily of one political mind, we know that, but actually having students engage with Israelis. I mean, I know from the Brandeis example, having Israeli students, many of whom who already served in the IDF, engaged in the classroom, engaged in the dining halls, makes a huge difference in terms of how other students perceive of Israel. So I think it's important to get more exposure to Israel and Israeli scholars and students. That's number one. And number two is, Jessica and I are both great admirers of what the Harvard Jewish Alumni Association did in terms of its curricular audit. It did a painstaking study of looking at what was going on in the classroom, what was being taught across the schools, what research was being funded in the different research centers and institutes, and then calling to the attention of the senior administration and the board at Harvard to say, look, here's what's going on. What are you going to do about it? I think we need to do that, not to call out institutions and do it publicly and sort of shame them, but rather to engage leadership and to engage boards as to what's going on so that they can have a course correction. So I think both of those things are needed in order to neutralize or at least bring more perspectives on the Middle East and on Israel.
This is a question for Ari. It comes from the great Martin Crossell. I have a question for Rabbi Berman. Why you also has difficult and controversial issues that it must tackle. How do you teach about a Jewish thinker like Heschel, or Jewish thinkers like Heschel, who were associated with non-Orthodox institutions? How do you teach subjects like biblical criticism, which challenge some core Orthodox philosophies? Are you providing a model for how secular universities can deal with similar controversial issues?
I love that question. And that's exactly right. I mean, we teach our students the expanse of thought across the board. We don't just teach Orthodox Jewish thinkers. They study from the beginning of time, certainly through Plato and Aristotle, down to the multiple possibilities of today. It's also, by the way, we don't just have Orthodox Jews in Yeshiva University either, meaning there's a wide range of students who are with us. So we have an open conversation that is embracing of each person's divinity. I mean, that's actually one of our core principles, is that everyone is filled with Kedusha, is B'Tselem Elokim, in God's divine image. And we want each person to contribute to the conversation. And that's how we grow as a community and as a society. I'll just say one more thing, that in our graduate schools, we have, Middle Eastern Arabs sitting together with former army Israeli soldiers, and who are taking the same classes and are able to be in conversation with one another, because there's a collective spirit that is positive and that's embracing. So we don't see problems with bringing in a difference. It's just the opposite. It's that actually brings out greatness. It's just how you do it that is with the clarity and the sense of purpose that makes it all happen.
Dawn Blitz asks a question I cannot resist asking Ron, because I know your academic background, Ron, is in political geography, although I think it's with a Russia focus, but I'm going to ask this anyway. Can you speak to the various responses, reactions we have seen from universities post 10/7 based on geography?
In other words, in the United States, where things have,
Yeah.
In terms of administrative responses or student responses?
I think Dawn Blitz's question is wide open. I would note that the protests seem to be coastal and largely northern. I don't remember Southern Methodist University, the University of Florida, or other schools having the same kinds of problems that Columbia, Harvard, Berkeley, and UCLA had.
I think it's more complicated than that. First of all, yeah, SMU, I guess, had the Israeli flags on their campus, and they were not obstructed whatsoever. That was pretty impressive. No, I would say it's more complicated, Brett. If you look at, like, Indiana University had huge and continues to have huge issues there. Wash U in St. Louis, had their share and their arrests and their upheaval as well. So yes, certainly on the coast, it's been big. You could have predicted that the California system was going to be big with protests, and they certainly have been, and they've been really a focus here in the Northeast as well. I think, it's maybe politically incorrect to raise this issue, but I also think you need to look at what is the international composition of the student bodies at these institutions, and what has happened on those institutions' campuses. And I think that is a higher correlate than perhaps East Coast, Midwest, South. Yes, the South has been more or less clear of these protests, but for the rest of the country, I think if you look at what the composition of the student body is, you're going to find some surprising correlations.
If I could add, Brett, can I just add, in addition to geography in that conversation, I'd also point out that faith-based universities did not have the same problems.
Right.
And the closeness, and people don't know this, how attached Yeshiva University is, for example, with Notre Dame and Baylor and BYU. There's a whole slate of faith-based universities that stand with their Jewish students and that have actually been a strong force for good. And in America today, we don't think about this enough. While universities are on the decline in its student enrollment, faith-based universities are up. Yes. Because students are actually searching for meaning, and they're finding it in these safe spaces where they're able to study widely and look for meaning and purpose.
Lisa Malul, I hope I didn't mispronounce her surname, asks, and this I think is for you, Ron, thoughts on creating a mechanism to support academics and students who take risks to challenge the proponents of anti-Zionism?
I think there are a lot of organizations out there that support such individuals. And I think something that we've been thinking about, both Jessica and I together in terms of our next project, is how you bring together the practices of these individual organizations to support. AEN, for example, supports individual faculty members and gives them pretty great support. I think we want to make that much more public, and we want to find ways to extend that to students as well. Right now, there's not much incentive for students who feel who want to push back, other than some brave students who believe that running is not the answer, that keeping a Jewish presence at the institutions where they're facing these issues is critical. But I think that's what our work is cut out for us, is finding ways, as I said, to bring together all those groups who have been interested in supporting these silent individuals and those who want to step forward to do so more effectively.
One quick point here. Bonnie Hausman wants to know whether there will be a link to this conversation. She's in a community of academics who couldn't be on the Zoom, and we're looking for a link. So my colleague Yael Warach, who's listening in silently, will be able to answer that question for Bonnie. I think the answer is yes, but I'm not 100% sure. Let's see if there's one quick last question. Maybe this is a layup, but I'm going to ask it all the same. Deborah Copald wants to know, do you think calling for the genocide of Jews, or at least these phrases, globalize the intifada from the river to the sea, there's only one solution, intifada revolution, create an unlawful hostile environment under Title VI? Your views?
Ari, you want to go first?
Sure. Unquestionably, and not just in Title VI, one of the things that we've been focusing on all through last year is that students should know that they can report any harassment, not just physical harassment, but verbal harassment, to their campus police. And under the Clery Act, the universities need to publish that. There is a mechanism to catch their voices. I've been working with the Secretary of Education, with the Department of Education. They've sent out a couple of notices to encourage students to report any harassment, also verbal harassment. It's illegal, report it, and the school has to report its numbers. We've also been working with the Department of Education to uncover the reporting of the Clery Act. Right now, they report mass numbers. We want to unpack it so that they report the anti-Semitism and the racism, so we can actually see with clarity what's going on in each university. This is a very significant effort. We've really been working on that call to protect all of the students, the Jewish students, any students, any diverse student who's subject to not just physical but verbal harassment. There's really been a misunderstanding of what's against the law, and it's very important for that to disseminate.
I'd say the answer is an easy yes. The answer is, of course, and early on, I made that call and felt that these terms were gratuitous speech rather than freedom of speech. It was not in the majority of my colleagues, but I do believe that those are beyond the red line.
You know, there were a lot of disappointments as university presidents in the last, never mind the last year, last couple of decades. But there have been some outstanding university presidents. And it's really an honor to have the two of you, two of the few outstanding university presidents on this Zoom, and for me to have the chance to publish you both in the same issue of SAPIR and to have this kind of in-depth conversation. I have a feeling we could go on another hour, but I want to be respectful of people's time. I apologize to the people whose questions I didn't get to. You can see there were at least 20 questions that people were curious about. But that's why we have these conversations. And I want to encourage everyone here to read every essay, not least Ari's, Ron's, and Jessica's, and this issue of SAPIR and future issues. We love creating this community of writers and readers and doers and philanthropists and thinkers who are devoted to ideas for a thriving Jewish future. Thank you so much for spending the hour with us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bret. Thank you.